So I was 17 and my lung spontaneously collapsed. I didn't know that that was happening. I was in the Santa Cruz Mountains on a senior year retreat, and I felt like I was getting stabbed again and again and again in my chest and getting the wind knocked out of me. My name is VerDarLuz, and if you're listening to the podcast, welcome. This is the first episode to Astrocartography with VerDarLuz. Find your power places. So here's what that day changed in my life. Pretty much everything. I didn't know whether I was going to live or die. I was unable to breathe, and I went to a Catholic high school, so I had priests over me doing the last rites, and it was a very intense moment. And you could hear Metallica's "Fade to Black" going off. I was a big Metallica fan, and that song is all about kind of moving towards death, right? Death greets me warm. Now I will just say goodbye. Yeah, it was like that. And so I eventually made it to the hospital, and they found out that my lungs had spontaneously collapsed. My right lung had collapsed. And my parents came over. This was in Santa Cruz. Came over the mountain, freaking out. And I was in the hospital for over 10 days while my lung was being drained of this crazy fluid, mystery fluid. And it was really intense. And I wrote about this in my second book about the wounded healer, Chiron, that in the hospital during that time, everyone I knew that they came and visited me. And it was the greatest outpouring of love that I ever had in my life. And in that way, it was the most beautiful gift. And I felt really close to God, to spirit. And that's always stuck with me. And it was a real gift. I later, as I studied shamanism, understood that, if I was in an indigenous culture that had shamans as healers, I would have been chosen to go on that shamanic path because I survived. And that has been my path. I've worked with shamans in the Amazon, Mayan shamans as well, done a lot of medicine work and ceremonial work and lead some of that as well. And that has been a beautiful gift as part of this journey. But what it really did for me was, it was like a spanking, spanking from the cosmos. That was like, get your ass in gear and go live. Carpe diem, seize the day. And so it was like, I lived this very sheltered life, and I was fairly happy, in school, very good student. But it was that year that I discovered Jack Kerouac in a counterculture class. And not only Jack, but all of the beats, Ginsberg and Burroughs and incredible writers that really, made me want to get on the road and, have real life experiences. And when I went to college and university and I was studying like classical literature, I got really bored because I had come from a high school class where I'd been studying, Jack Kerouac and, all these escapades and, smoking and drugs and sex and, sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of lifestyle. And I was also a guitarist. But it wasn't that as much as just wanting to live my own life, and not do what was expected of me. And what was expected was that I complete a university degree because I had a free ride to a Jesuit college university. And that was really a gift for sure. It came from my good grades all through high school. But it also didn't align with the depression that I was experiencing. I felt very alone in a lot of my first 2 years of college. I had the gift of becoming a DJ and, indie rock and kind of emo. And that really changed my life and influenced my art and music. But beyond that, I wanted to live. And fortunately, I was blessed to meet a guy from Scotland who told me about working on a kibbutz in Israel. And I had no idea that these things even existed, and that you could go and change your life and go live and volunteer and be around other people from all over the world, especially Europe, where I really wanted to go. And this was like my Kerouac, invitation to get on the road. And since I wasn't so happy in school and felt pretty alone, I made that decision. And I felt like when I got off that plane in Tel Aviv in Israel, my first trip abroad, that I had chosen my own life. And whatever was going to happen from that date and movement forward, that time forward was going to be, a gift from the cosmos, and also from myself being willing to take that risk, and, I'm so grateful for that moment in my life, but I also gave up a lot. And I have over the years. I've now traveled to 47 countries and I live mostly abroad. I'm from California, but I live a lot of times throughout Europe. I've lived also in England, um, been in, Southeast Asia, Central America, Mexico. I've traveled to almost every continent except for Australia and Antarctica. But you give up some things when you do that, right? You give up familiarity. You give up what you know through your own culture, um, through the stores, the directions, how to get to the grocery store and get to the mall to get something or whatever it might be that you need. Very simple things that you just don't have when you're traveling and figuring out what to do in a new location. And a lot of times I've lived in places for a very short amount of times, which is also quite exhausting. And so at the same time, I have been able to experience so much in my life. And I feel really blessed that I did make that initial decision. And I feel even more blessed that the world of locational astrology came into my life, astrocartography. It came in actually in India first through the language of astrology and through someone that I met who I was dating, who taught me about Mars and Venus and the masculine and feminine energies and what we want to be honored for in that and what we're attracted to in that, through astrology. And I was never against astrology or for it. In my early 20s, when I was in college for a bit, I was really into Rob Bresney's work. He was so funny, and he had these columns that would appear in like our, local newspaper. And, I just felt it was something. But then when I met this partner, and when I learned about Mayan astrology and this 2012 end date, like this prophecy, I was like, what is this? I knew the Mayans were really tapped in, right? Like, obviously you have these pyramids, you have a culture that created this incredible, like, logo, how would we call it? A system of both, visual and, like logographic writing where like a picture was also like an idea being communicated, and I first learned about this and I was like, whoa, this is so interesting. And I had written about communication and how we develop a sense of self from that, from different languages in the East and indigenous culture. So I was really fascinated with that. And then, understanding that this culture had an extremely intensely deep and penetrating astrology system. And so I started getting into that and met this partner, and I was like, I have to study this astrology a lot more. And then I got a Vedic reading in India, and I got a Tibetan astrology reading, and I was like, okay, like these are all reflecting me in different ways, just like a little different symbol set. And then I went back to the States and I went deep into relationship astrology. I went to a few conferences and discovered this thing called astrocartography, and that we could actually look at different places in the world and the kinds of energies that they held for us, the influences. the kinds of patterns we would play out there. And I had traveled a bit at that point. I was 27 when I started to learn about this work. I started to practice this work. And I'd been to Southeast Asia and India at that point. I'd been to Europe, and I could see that this was incredibly accurate. And I'm just going to show you here a little bit. And this is going to be for those who are on the podcast. I just want to share a few of the places that I went to in my travels, and some of the images here, including where I went in Delphi, where I taught on my Jupiter line, Jupiter on the angle of career, and that was where I did a retreat, and it's a place that also expanded not only my work but my soul. Which Jupiter locations can do. They can be very inspiring and bring opportunities to your life. I also have this image of me in Sevilla in Spain, where I studied the flamenco guitar. And that is my Venus line. And Venus can be an area that can bring lots of art into your life and aesthetics. I love the Spanish language in general. I prefer speaking it. I enjoy some wine from Spain, and I think flamenco is beautiful, and other art forms, but that Venus energy of aesthetics and beauty for sure. I also have some images here from South Africa in Cape Town, which is both Jupiter and Mercury location for me. Mercury is a great line where you could learn a lot of things, communicate a lot, great for languages or studies. I learned how to surf for the first time when I was 45. And so I have this image of me doing that here. And I quite loved hiking around and just kind of exploring that energy of that place. I also went on my first safari. And so I have this image of the jaguar, which we saw in South Africa as well. Mercury lines can also make us travel a bunch on them. Now I also have some other part of Africa, but in the north, and I have Egypt here, and I have Dahab, and I have also Cairo. And this was a Pluto location for me. Some other influences as well, but I felt Egypt in my soul for a very, very long time. And Pluto locations can be very intense and deep and trigger our unconscious. They can activate our shadow. They can also give us, really deep esoteric and occult teachings. Pluto rules all of the deep psychological processes and therapeutic processes, but also can be quite intense energetically. And I will say that you have to be quite careful on Pluto lines. I know for me, I got sick on the line. I also have had just really intense experiences when I first traveled. I couldn't sleep well the first 7 or 8 days I was there, and I had to take some sleep medicine, and that really screwed up my whole energy. It affected the relationship that I was in and my travel partner. It brought up some power struggles, which Pluto can do. But also I wrote some of the deepest poetry I ever have in my life, and writing. I studied really powerful healing techniques. And, the place itself, I went diving, and I love Dahab for that. But it's a location you have to be careful with, and different people, depending on your own chart, will have a different relationship to Pluto, how difficult or maybe flowing it could be. And, that is something too I learned about in this other image I'm showing, which is me volunteering at Mother Teresa's Center for the Dying in Calcutta in India. That was on my moon line. That was again when I was only 25. And that was very significant for me because the moon is a nurturing planet, a caregiving, maternal energy. And I did multiple volunteer projects in India, which kind of fulfilled that provider, nurturer, caregiver element. And it was very emotionally impactful for me to be around the dying and those who were very sick, the elderly. Yeah, and I have moon in Virgo, the sign of the sacred servant, and so being of service is something very, natural for that, and it was natural for me there. I also have an image here, the last image I'll show, which is me at Chichen Itza in the Mayan lands, the Mayan Riviera, and this pyramid, this was on December 21st, 2012, where I went to celebrate that, and, this is another Pluto location for me, and a place where the nodes cross, and the nodes represent karma and dharma, or where we might have some past life energy, something that feels familiar, but also something that feels like it's calling or pulling us forward, magnetizing us into our destiny. And, of course, this whole culture helped me become an astrologer. I studied Mayan astrology for a few years, but I also met a very, very significant romantic partner here, and it did change the course of my life. And Pluto lines can always do that, as well as nodal lines. And for me, they're very close in this part of the world. So I'm gonna stop that share for now and just come come back on screen here, and yeah, just to say, this journey with locational astrology has been such a gift. And that's why I wanted to create this channel. I've been doing it for 20 years now and 47 countries, like I said, one for every year of my life. And I really want to share. I want to share my own stories. I also want to share the stories of famous charts. And I've done a lot of research into that. Um, Also, the stories of some clients, some case studies. What I realized is that this language of locational astrology or astrocartography or astrolocality, it can be applied to so many people at so many phases of life. One of the obvious ones is if you are going on a honeymoon or an anniversary or you're doing a destination wedding, there's going to be the best places for that and places you would probably want to avoid. And that's for each person, as well as the timing of that. That's a really important aspect of this work that I do called cyclocartography. It's an aspect of astrocartography. So that's when you're choosing the exact dates and times for your travels or for your relocation. We also have, of course, retirees, people that are buying real estate abroad or even where you're from. Um, that's a big community. And I've worked with people in the last few years through international living and some organizations where I've met people who are retiring and they want to know where to invest. So that's a really important area. And then if you're a digital nomad, like I have been a lot of the last 10 years, there's so many options. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. And just because everyone's going to, Thailand or Bali or Medellin, Colombia, that doesn't mean it's the best place for you. And there may be places you never even thought of that could be really powerful, expansive, growth oriented, spiritually elevated, fun, all of those things, calling in more money and resources. So, of course, there's families that are traveling. There's world schooling families, and this work can help them. There's also just general relocation, right? We want to move somewhere in the country we're from or a different country, and what places are going to support our intentions. And so there's a lot of communities, individuals, families that can be supported with this. Also, retreat leaders. I've been working with a lot of retreat leaders. And of course, if you're, doing a retreat, you want to have a place that really supports the intentions of that retreat. And that also comes into the timing that you're doing it. So if you're making choices around that, this is where this tool can be so helpful for you. So I've created another video in this new series to describe what is astrocartography, what is locational astrology. So you can see that coming up next. And this is going to be, this new series. And I'm so excited to share it. Find Your Power Places, Astrocartography with VerDarLuz. Thank you for tuning in, whether it's on the podcast or on the video. And we're going to see you in the next episode all about what is astrocartography and locational astrology. Thanks for subscribing and sharing this with all your friends, anyone relocating, anyone buying a house somewhere, any of these kinds of things, going on a honeymoon. We appreciate that support and we'll check in with you next time. Happy travels.